Hello, my name is Madeline Busby and I'm your host for tonight. Welcome to our February virtual tasting. This tasting is all about falling in love with flavour. With our February outturn tomorrow, we'll be honing in on our flavour profile of the month, sweet, fruity and mellow. We'll also be chatting about loving relationships in the whisky world, both in human and whisky form. If you're tuning in after the live tasting, welcome. Please let us know which dram's your favourite. We'll also happily answer any questions after the fact, so please drop them in the chat and we'll take it from there. Finally, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with all of our videos. Let's take a look at the running order for tonight. First, we'll start with cask number 12.51, Bittersweet Symphony. Next up, it's cask number 7.266, Hypnotherapy, followed by cask number 35.304, Thine Happy Place. Then cask number 16.55, Grubbly Magnetic, followed by cask number 3.330, Sherlock Holmes in the Lost World. This is the point to make sure you have your drams and your tasting mat ready, along with any pairings that you've chosen for the evening. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to your ambassador for tonight. We have Connis Connor.
Evening, Madeline. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
It's wonderful to be here. I'm really enjoying getting to talk to people again. It feels like we've been hibernating for too long, and it's just a pleasure to get out there with the whiskey again.
I know, first tasting of 2022 as well.
It is, and what a great lineup we have here. I've just been trying them, and I don't often agree with everything the panel writes on the bottles, but tonight they've kind of got it. Fair play to them.
Unfortunately, Stephen McConnachie, our other ambassador, isn't able to be with us tonight, but we do have a very special guest joining us. So I'd like to introduce you to Iain Allan, the legend from Glen Moray Distillery.
Evening, Madeline. Evening, Connas. How are we all tonight?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. Like yourself. So this is, I think, my first virtual tasting of 2022, and given how frequent they've been for the past couple of years, it actually feels like a while since I've done one of these. So actually looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's weird because they were kind of all the time, and then it felt really strange not doing one in January. So it's good to be back. Good to be back.
It is that. And I look forward to tonight. Great lineup of drams.
Excellent. Well, I think maybe with that, we should just kick off and start with dram number 1. What do you think?
I don't mind if I do, frankly, Madeline. Let's go for it. So we have Bittersweet Symphony. I wonder where they got that name from. Sounds like a lucky man to me. But this is 12.51. It's from Speyside. It's first fill bourbon barrel. It's 11 years old. And if you happen to be married on the 29th of September 2009, maybe drop us a line and we're going to have a little shout to you, because that's when this was distilled, and we're all about love tonight. And it's 58.4%. So we're going to give it a little bit of a smell here. Now, as I mentioned briefly before, I don't always agree with the things that they put on the labels here, or our team up at the vaults there. But this time I think they've nailed it right on the head. I've actually written a few little down here, but it does present initially as a little bit restrained, but if you just give it a couple of minutes, it opens up wonderfully, and it's got this thick, warm, custardy sort of tin fruit salad intertwined with sort of floral honeyness going on in there. And on the palate, more of the same, that kind of softness, incorporating some of those vanilla notes from the bourbon, and just an all-round sweet, fruity, and mellow experience. If you're interested, if you do a lot of reading, I would certainly suggest very strongly that you pick up the Unfiltered this month and give a read of Julian's article on the sweet, fruity, and mellow flavor profile. He delves deep into all of the sort of parts of the process that can affect these fruity flavors, esters and aldehydes, etc. I'm not a scientist, so I don't want to fall down a rabbit hole and not be able to answer any of your questions. But in short, yeast or flavor factories, as Dr. Forrester would put it, and they produce so much flavor into the wash, which is then selected from the distillation process and popped into a barrel. But, sometimes we overlook that and we concentrate on maturation as a point of flavor, but it's not all about maturation, even though we are masters of it. What do we think of that one, Mads?
It's a beautiful dram. One of the things I really struggled with when I first came to whiskey was that everyone kept talking about esters. And I'm like, what are they talking about? It was such a buzzword. And I think, with sweet, fruity, and mellow, you get that a wee bit. You get those esters and those fruity notes from the longer fermentation times, potentially.
Mhm.
But equally, in Julian's article, he talks about how the cask is it's all about perfect pairings, and the cask is equally important.
Mhm.
So there's some beautiful things going on in this dram, and yeah, I think it's a good flavor profile to start things off with.
Yeah, it's that introductory, get your palate ready kind of dram, but it's a kind of double-edged sword, that, because it's one of those that you could kind of happily go on drinking all night as well. It's just so accessible. It's I often think sometimes that bourbon sometimes can be sort of looked at as the poor relation to sherry, but I love a nice bourbon cask, and this is showing everything with the integration between the fruity and the mellow, and that little bit of spiciness at the end is just wonderful. It's really, really set me up nicely.
I think, some of the notes that you get with this flavor profile as well, you get tropical notes, which I see Owen is already getting. John thinks it's slightly oily, and Glenn says it has a tang of lemon pips. Those are all things, at least the lemon pips and the tropical honey smash, that are quite typical of this flavor profile. You'll get things like lemon meringue pie, orange slices, pina colada, just really nice, sweet notes that, as you said, they're a good way to start things off, get your palate working.
Absolutely. What do we
Bourbon
think?
casks. Sorry, you spoke about how sometimes bourbon casks get overlooked. I came into this industry with an absolute love for the cliched sherry bomb and looking for that bigger flavor profile. But sometimes it's great to be reminded the quality of what a good bourbon cask can bring. Just at times a more subtler effect, and sometimes we don't want hit in the face with flavor. We're just looking for something gentler, softer. And tonight's topic is about love, and it's sometimes you have to remind yourself that these casks are lovely, and you can fall in love with bourbon as much as any of these more interesting, more experimental, bigger, bolder casks.
I couldn't agree more. As far as the whiskey that we drink is concerned, the past 20 years or so, bourbon has been the foundation of everything we've done. No matter what it is or who you're buying your whiskey from, it's all about the bourbon cask as a starting place. And God bless it, frankly. God bless it.
You look at all the finishes as well. We forget, we talk about the finish on a cask, and we forget that it starts life as a bourbon, and that creates the spine of the flavor. That creates the real backbone to any cask finished whiskey that you have. So the bourbon is a key part to it. We've experimented. I'll try not to make it all about Glen Moray tonight, but we've experimented a lot with what works best in a finish. And a lot of people think a finish is about rescuing a cask. But sometimes you can utilize the bourbon influence to build the flavor. So we've done a lot of first fill bourbons and finished those because you still want that spine of that sweetness and that soft texture and flavor that comes with a really good quality bourbon cask. And this is a reminder of exactly that.
Yeah, and once you get that sort of basis for layering flavor, there's nothing better really when you sort of break down what you can taste, being able to sort of pick out what does what, and the more nerdy analysis side of things that we're used to, Ian. But it all starts, yeah.
And you were talking about cask is king and cask flavor, but the esters and the formation of your spirit. Your spirit's the kingmaker. You can't forget that. Your cask is important. It is applying a huge amount of flavor. But the basis of your spirit, those esters that are formed through fermentation, the reaction it's having with the copper through the distillation process, what that builds into your flavor profile of your new make spirit really dictates in certain directions. If you have a very light spirit, a bourbon cask is ideal for you. If you are heavier, meatier kind of flavor and texture to your spirit, then you can start to push out a little bit further. So your spirit is hugely important to the direction that you can take within your maturation as well.
Yeah, and if we bring that into context with what we do here at the SMWS, we don't just have one new make spirit to deal with. We have potentially 150. So, the guys on the spirit team, it's their job to kind of make those connections and do some speed dating, if you like, spirits versus casks, and, reach that harmony that we want at the end of the day. And it's all about that kind of the whole being better than the sum of its parts, as it were. It's an art, to say the least.
Yeah, I don't envy. We have one new make spirit, and at times it's difficult to decide what we're going to do with that. I don't envy.
Okay, well, I've not actually tried it with water yet. Somebody was saying there on the comments there, so I'm going to just pop myself a little bit of water in there.
I just to get your thoughts. I saw a comment there by Gillian about being new to whiskey. I always direct people towards a bourbon cask if they're new to whiskey. Mm-hmm. You guys, you think the same? Is that a good approach? For me, it was sherry casks that was my first love with Scotch whiskey. So,
yeah,
I would. After you, Madeline.
I was going to say, I think it's a good place to start. Certainly, we actually, or I did a bit of work this month on a piece for Unfiltered about blind tastings, and we asked our ambassadors for their top tips. And I think in this case, actually, a blind tasting, if you're new to whiskey, is really good, especially if you were to have kind of all bourbon barrels, ex-bourbon barrels. You could just, especially with society whiskies, kind of see what kind of different influences there can be, because they can be so radically different. But it's one of these things you have to kind of ask yourself, how blind are you going to go on a blind tasting? Are you going to put the samples in different bottles so people can't guess what bottles are? Are you going to use colored glasses? There are a lot of different ways to do it. So if anyone's interested in learning more about blind tastings, check that article out. But I do think a bourbon cask is a great place to start. It's humble but wonderful, in my opinion, and it can do great things.
Yeah, very, very much ground zero, as I like to refer to it. You can build everything on top of that. Water softens and brings out some of the sweetness. I would agree with you there. Missed your name, sorry. But, I don't think water drop is any good. More bitterness coming through. We'll see.
Mike says it in. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I certainly get a little bit more bitterness at the back of the palate there. Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from there. But the softening of the spirit is, palpable to me. And preferred without water in? That's great. That's another thing. There are no rights and wrongs. Once it's in your glass, there's lots of rules about making it, lots of rules about selling it. But once it's in your glass, all bets are off. It's up to you what you think of it. And if one person likes it and the other one doesn't, they're both right. It's fine. It's not something to argue about. Not when the theme's love, anyway.
No. Well, we once had a member who actually, who during one of these virtual tastings said that they either buy 2 tasting packs or they take their sample and they split it so that they can have, half pure and kind of half with water. And that way there's like a pure experience of both. And if it doesn't take water well, then you still have the other half.
Yes. I seem to remember a certain Mr. John McShane on one of these broadcasts we were doing, advocating buying whole bottles instead, so you can experiment more. And that's one of many reasons why John's considered to be a legend. As long as you do that responsibly, folks, that's the main thing.
Absolutely. And Anne is pointing out there that it was actually herself that had that recommendation. So thank you, Anne, because we recommend it every time. It's such a good idea.
Absolutely.
I suppose this would be a good time to actually try the Dip Dab pairings. I have to admit, this is a new one for me. I've never had this before.
You've never had a sherbet dip? Prepare for a life-changing experience, Madeline.
I've got a spoon to make it a bit more.
That's not the proper dip dab.
Have you not got the little?
You need
No,
the
I
stick.
do.
You need the stick.
I feel like every one of these virtual tastings, I try something new and different that I've not had before.
The revelation for me is how somebody gets to adult life without having ever tried a dip dab. That's
no, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
A shattered life has been led there. It can be a little bit of an assault on the senses. We probably should have mentioned that.
Yep. That was quite unexpected. I didn't grow up in Scotland or the UK, so I'm guessing it's a kind of a UK specialty.
Quite possibly.
But I will now try the whiskey to assess.
I couldn't find any in Gateshead earlier on, so we'll assume that
they've sold out. It's so popular.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, that's it.
It's quite hard to find, actually. I had to ask in the shop. Wasn't sure where it was going to be in the shop either, so.
I doubt you would have found it in the alcohol aisle. It wasn't sitting next to the whiskey for a food pairing.
It was quite close to the alcohol, actually, between the alcohol and the loo roll.
Well,
maybe there was some sort of issue with panic buying a couple of years ago. So.
Could be. It does work quite well, although I will say I get a little bit more bitterness with that. So, but. I will go back to it a bit later when I'm not on camera and try it properly.
Awesome stuff.
So we've got a question from John of when are you bringing your tasting to Gateshead?
Hello, John. I think I met John. Correct me if I'm wrong, John. I think I met you at Kendal Festival just before Christmas there. I would love, as you know, to bring a SMWS tasting to my hometown. If I can find a way, I will. But there's work to be done yet. But in the meantime, we've got a couple of festivals coming up. If you're interested in popping up to Glasgow's Whiskey Festival in a couple of weeks' time, 2 weeks tomorrow, we'll be there. If you're a member, we might have something special for you. And then 2 weeks after that, so 4 weeks from this weekend, we're in Newcastle. So John, if you're coming, come and say hello. We do have, I'm not allowed to say exactly when, we do have external members tasting in Newcastle very soon. It should be going live on the website momentarily, I believe.
It'll be on the 24th of February.
24th of February, that's the night before the festival, John. So apply your drinking shoes, and we'll talk some whiskey over that weekend.
Great. Sorry.
Yeah. I was going to suggest moving on to dram number 2. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, no, sounds good to me. So dram number 2 is cask number 7.266, Hypnotherapy. It's a 14-year-old space cider, 56.3% ABV, second fill ex-bourbon barrel, and it's in our spicy and sweet category. So when we talk about flavor and this particular flavor profile, I personally feel it can offer a really wide range of tasting notes. So you get really spicy things like star anise or garam masala, all the way to cinnamon Danish and balsamic strawberries. So you get a really wide and contrasting range of sweet and spice. And I'm not going to give my tasting notes just yet, because I'm going to let you try it and see what you say and then agree or disagree. But I do think this one was a bit of a shapeshifter for me, especially when I added water. And some of the notes generally that you might also get, you might get quite a bit of fresh oak with this flavor profile. So it can really vary. Don't be afraid to add water. I think this one takes water quite well. And I'm curious to see what everyone's tasting notes are on it. I'm gonna try it now with fresh eyes, or fresh nose, I should say. So on the nose, for me, initially with this one, I thought I really got a lot of kind of spicy blackberries and wood, a bit of jam on a buttered biscuit. But when I tasted it, that spicy wood still kind of was there, but it became quite orangey, and there was, there were orange slices in custard, some dark chocolate shavings, and a bit more of that spicy wood, which is probably a bit of the fresh oak coming through.
Yeah, I'm finding that very interesting. When I tried it earlier, I didn't get this particular note, but now when I'm trying it, there is a sort of fresh green herbalness just sitting behind the sort of the notes you mentioned there. That's quite fresh and sort of refreshing, if you like. And just reading the tasting notes here, I am now getting the cider, the farmhouse cider as well, which is making me happy. I like it.
I think that's the thing. Foreshadowing is a bit, when you start talking about what the tasting notes are or what you're getting, quite often it does influence what others are getting, which isn't necessarily a bad thing unless you're sitting on a panel or something and everyone's supposed to come up with their own original tasting note.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like what you were saying about blind tasting. You're influenced by different things. If you take those things out of the equation and you're just left with your senses, it can be a completely different experience altogether. And again, no one's right, no one's wrong. And also, whiskey, it kind of evolves even in the glass. I find, if you leave it there for long enough, maybe you get some evaporation or whatever, the surrounding atmosphere is like will affect your whiskey, and it will change over time. And it's just fascinating to hear everyone's different sort of opinions, and it just all adds to the conversation, and that's what we're about.
We've just had a really good tasting note from Joel, who said someone's driven a ride-on mower through a bramble hedge, which is definitely.
It's a very SNWS tasting note.
It is a very
This is a distillery very close to home for me. One which I absolutely love. I don't think it's as appreciated as it should be out in the wider whiskey world. But second fill bourbon, I think again, cask year important, but the cask year is allowing the spirit to shine through even after 14 years. You're getting that kind of sweet, that apple note, that cider influence. That's really the spirit cutting through on it, where the cask isn't as dominant. It's having an effect. When we go first, second, we go up to third fill, but you can see the difference, the different influence, the less spice coming through as each time you use it, and it softens the influence of the cask if we use it for a second, third time.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Ian. Distillery 7, well, at least up until about 5 or 6 years ago, was my favourite sort of hidden gem of Speyside. It's less hidden now, which is a double-edged sword for me because the price has gone up. But there we are. But it's a very consistent distillery, and it's rare that you get a bad 7, in my opinion. In fact, I don't think I've had a bad 7 from the SMWS.
Dorothy was saying it was an introduction to the society, and I'd agree with that. I'm pretty sure it's one of the first distilleries that I ever had when I started with the SMWS as well, and they're good.
Yeah. It's there are a lot of distilleries who the backbone, as it were, is supplying single malt to the blending sector, and it's basically one of those distilleries that has to have great consistent spirit all of the time to fulfill that need. And when you find it in single cask form, it's usually top-notch stuff.
We do also have a bit of a link. There is quite a great love story that has a bit of a side in Speyside. So if you'll indulge me, I'd like to tell this wee story. I won't tell all of it because it's too long and we have a tasting to get on with. But I will say that this is a love story that Dave Broom describes as one of the greatest love stories of the 20th century. So it's only fitting for February. So we have Rita Cowan from Kirkintilloch. She fell in love with her family's Japanese lodger, Masataka Takatsuru, She married him in 1920 in Calton in Glasgow. He was a student studying organic chemistry at the University of Glasgow, but his goal was to study whiskey distillation, and he did so, spending time at Longmorn and then at Bonus Grain Distillery before a 5-month apprenticeship in Campbelltown at Hazelburn. So at the end of 1920, Rita and Masataka headed to Japan. And although neither of them knew it, it was the start of a lifelong relationship that would eventually see her known as the mother of Japanese whiskey, after the establishment of their distillery in Yochi on the island of Hokkaido. So it's this beautiful love story, and there's so many different parts to it. I would really recommend either reading the article in Unfiltered, or if you prefer podcasts, their episode 10 of Whiskey Talk actually talks about this and tells more about the story of Masataka and Rita Taketsuru, but definitely recommend reading it this month because it's a great story.
Yeah, the more I find out about Masataka Taketsuru, it's one of those things. The general perception is he came to Scotland, he learned about whiskey, he went home with a Scottish wife, and it's much more fascinating than that. There's all kinds of twists and turns. He didn't come just once; he came a couple of times, and there were all kinds of issues around different things. And just the sort of tenacity and the sort of the hardiness of the relationship with Rita must have, in context of the time, must have been exceptional. It's as Mr. Broom says, it's a great love story.
It is, and I think one of the things, it's this thing of also, being from one place but making your home in another. And their house, for example, they had a proper Scottish sitting room, and then a room with tatami mats and kind of low tables. So they really tried to kind of have both worlds in a way.
Did they eat haggis with chopsticks? That would be a difficult
thing. I don't know.
That's fusion food, yeah.
But it's a beautiful story, and I think one of the things that I thought was the strangest when I was reading it is that actually Rita is really well known as the mother of Japanese whiskey in Japan, but it's not a title that in the English speaking world she's kind of, it's not used as often. So definitely it's one to read and enjoy.
And Glen's also detecting glass, and someone's asking about your bottles there.
My bottles, I would say most of them are open. All of them will be opened at some point. It's just a matter of time. But there's one or two that are still new, and I feel like I kind of need to get through some of the open ones before I can allow myself to open another. I'm sure it's a problem that some of us are familiar with.
We're all accidental collectors.
I think with 12 flavor profiles, you just want to kind of have different things open to try, because one night you might want spicy and dry, and one night you might want deep, rich, and dried fruits.
Yeah. So, Ian, what are you finding in this one? You in general agreement, or are you getting something that went up?
Yeah, it's that lovely kind of clean freshness, that kind of typical, you nailed it with the sweet and spice. That is Speyside. When we used to talk about regional characteristics, and that's what this embodies. It's a typical Speysider, and that's what this distillery is generally known for, and it works really well. Lovely dram.
And I'm finding the longer I leave it, the more I like it. It's one of those. It took me a little while to kind of understand it, but now I'm sort of in with it, and I've recognized the grassiness and all that kind of thing. The complexity in it is really quite lovely. I'm very much enjoying that.
I think it's the kind of dram you probably need to spend a bit more time with. So, I mean, don't feel like you have to finish it now if you're still working on it at home. Come back to it, see how it's changed. Because it will change throughout the evening, especially as you try other whiskies and potentially other foods as well.
It's a dram I would describe as subtly complex. On first nosing, it doesn't feel too big and bold, but it starts to gradually reveal itself.
That's why it's my hidden gem. It's I shouldn't have told all those people about it. That's what I should have.
You're ruining it for yourself.
Aye. Well, we've had a lot of good tasting notes. I think before we move on to the next dram, it'd be good to kind of recap. And you know, a lot of members here are saying it really changes with water. John Paul is saying it's almost like chili and chocolate, and Iain is getting that as well. Bob getting a bit of burnt orange flavour and a warm pepper finish, but neat was neat.
Well said, Alan.
Well, with that, I think it's worth moving on to the next dram. And I believe the pairing for this one was a dinner jacket. So I'm just gonna do that quickly. Well
done. Props and
it's been keeping my lap warm the entire day.
Wardrobe department and anything. You know, is there anything you can't do there, Madeline?
I'm not great at maths, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah, I was okay at maths until the letters arrived. I didn't have a clue what they were talking about then. Anyway, we're on to dram number 3, which is distillery number 35, and it's Society Cask 304. We're calling this Thine Happy Place. It's from Spearside, from Second Fill ex-bourbon. It's 33 years old, from September 87, and there's only 205 bottles of this, and it's bottled at a surprisingly high for the age, 53.1%. Now, when I went for this earlier, the first thing that sprung to mind was green tea and a kind of floral honeyness, and I was a little bit concerned that it wasn't going to give me more than that. Then it opened up, and there's kind of thin peaks of candied orange peel grated on sort of breakfast pastries, and it's integrating lovely with a kind of gummy, herbal, mentally thing going on. And if I don't shut up about it now, I'll probably go on about it all night. I'll have a little taste.
I mean, to me, it smells like incense and kind of perfume. It's so rich.
And the mouthfeel especially, it's not overpoweringly clingy, but it's just sticking just lovely to the entire inside of my palate. And the finish is just, it'll be here until I'm on here again. It's ridiculous. But Distillery 35 is a distillery that you know a lot about, is it not, Iain?
Yeah, I think this is my comfort zone. This is Thine Happy Place. It is my happy place. So yeah, I think it probably doesn't give too much away there. Yeah, it's Glen Moray Distillery, a place I've known and loved for the past 17 years and longer. And I was having a look. I was trying to find more information about this cask. I was having a look through the old ledgers today to see if I could kind of furnish any more information, but sadly I came up a blank on it. But what I can say is 1987, we go back to quite an interesting year at Glen Moray in 1987. It was when we kicked into full-time production. So in March 1987, we switched the stills on to 24/7 production. The distillery manager at the time, Ed Dodson, that was his first year of taking over, being manager of the distillery as well. So we'd just taken on a new distillery manager in Ed, an absolute legend of the industry. And who was, prior to that, he was the assistant brewer it would have been at the time. So he'd kind of have a few years under his belt at Glen Moray before. And he was charged with getting the place running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He's since told me that that means that Glen Moray is the longest running 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week distillery in Scotland. I've never gone and researched to confirm with 100%, but I'm going to trust Ed on this one. So I'm going to say that Glen Moray's the longest running 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week distillery in Scotland. So that's led to a level of consistency within the spirit and the character. And you touched on that kind of thickness, viscosity, the kind of, that clinginess to the palate, that oiliness. And really, that is a real defining feature of Glen Moray's new make spirit. And that gives us the versatility to, do something like this, this length of maturation that, you're allowing the wood into it so much more. But it allows us to be a lot more playful about what we do and be more experimental at the distillery and playing around with things. So this is just a great example of vintage, old school Glen Moray from a really quite interesting year at the distillery. I was also tasked with trying to find a love story. I don't know if love's not in the air at Glen Moray because I couldn't really find too much. We have had 2 weddings at the distillery. We had a couple of weddings back in 2010, I think it was, when we started opening up. But we found they're quite challenging having bride and groom at your distillery. So after number 2, we decided that we would stop hosting weddings at the distillery. So we're maybe not the best one for love is in the air. But this whiskey can make you fall in love. We'll tie it into that, I think.
Indeed. And I'm a long-time singleton, and I'm getting all starry-eyed here. This is a great whiskey. I'm very impressed with it. I'm not going to tell anyone that it's currently online and for sale because I'm doing that right now. But via the links you have that you got sent out with your invites here, everything we're tasting tonight is up for sale if you want to get amongst it there. But you're saying about relationships and generally sort of couples in whiskey. There's been 1 or 2. I was having a little talk with Andrew Park the other day. We're trying to think of current ones. I'm thinking Eddie and Amanda Ludlow, or obviously the Whiskey Lounge, whose festival we're going to be at in Newcastle in a couple of weeks, and maybe Mark and Kate Watt down in Campbelltown are the only sort of married couples I can think of. There, anybody for any more? I don't think there is. Ooh, Herman and Alwyn are engaged to be married from William Grant, so congratulations to both of them. But I think we need more whiskey love.
We've got
Hans and Becky, of course,
yeah.
the whiskey
couple.
Of
course.
I miss doing my in-person tastings with Hans. We usually do one every year at the Spirit of Speyside Whiskey Festival, and we've had some great events over the year. One where I got to dress as a stormtrooper, so it was all good. So we've had some crazy ideas and crazy tasting with Hans and Becky. So that's my other love is Star Wars. So there's a whiskey pairing for me.
But Ian, aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper? Sorry, sci-fi nerds will understand that.
You're not pretty enough for that quote.
Yeah, I was doing my Princess impression there. Yeah, I don't often get mistaken for Carrie Fisher, to be fair.
Yeah.
So we've had a question from Joel about the 3 that's coming up later in the tasting. So all bottles are available except for the 3 that was released in January Outturn. So it's not for sale tonight, unfortunately.
Sorry about that, Joel. My fault.
But we're getting some great tasting notes through. Bob Miller said he's had Turkish Delight, Maltesers and raisins, and he's not going to add water. And Michael has some soft cream Bendix, which I'm not sure what they are, but I'm guessing they're maybe a chocolate snack.
I'm going to agree.
On that with water and Glen Moray, I very, very rarely is it even at cask strength, even I look at sometimes very rarely, but occasionally we will fill into cask at still strength, which is about 69% ABV. And we recently released a rye cask finish that was one of those casks, and it was in the kind of 62% kind of mark. and it rarely needs water. There's a softness to the spirit. It doesn't feel like the alcohol's too intense, too bold. And it tends to show itself with all its flavors. The addition of water sometimes helps to break it down and to open up certain flavors that might be hidden underneath. But with Glen Moray, I never find that's the case. It shows itself at cask strength really particularly well, and you find everything there. You sometimes have to take a little bit of time, but it will bring out all the flavor without the addition of too much water. Certainly, personally speaking, anyway, I've found that over the years.
Richard Turner suggesting seafood would also be a really good accompaniment for this dram, which I'd be curious to try.
Absolutely. And just on the point of casks again, this is a refilled bourbon cask that it's been in for 33 years, and it's still managed to hold that sort of spirit flavor in there. Yes, there is a lot of wood influence, but that sort of kind of combination of the refill bourbon as opposed to first fill, and that kind of soft spirit and everything is just going on in this drama. I like it very much.
Again, the Glen Moray spirit is great for that. It always shows itself. We've gone out our way to kind of batter and beat our spirit round the head with as many different cask types as we possibly can in the world of experimentation. And it doesn't matter what we do to it and how long we leave it for, if it's full maturation, if it's finishing. You always pick up the Glen Moray. And one of the great things I remember when I first started at Glen Moray, when we were owned by Glenmorangie, there was a bottling that came out called Serendipity, which was an accidental combination of Glen Moray and Ardbeg spirit, because we were part of the same group, part of the same bottling hall, and they both ended up in the same vat. And it was 12-year-old Glen Moray and it was 20-odd-year-old Ardbeg with about an 80-20 mix, only 20% of it Glen Moray. So on paper, you would write off the Glen Moray. You would just say that's lost. But it punched above. It shone through. It tempered that real intense kind of peaty ashtray flavor that the Ardbeg was carrying, and really brought out a kind of sweeter side to it. So it's a spirit which, if you look at maybe some of our core range bottlings, if you approach Glen Moray as the classic, a great kind of non-age statement whiskey, which is pretty accessible, pretty basic style for single malt, you're really missing out on what the spirit is capable of and what it can do, and when it can shine with some different flavors as well.
Yeah, it's not immediately logical for you to think that something that would describe as a soft spirit would kind of hold its own against something like a really aggressive Ardbeg. But you're absolutely right. It's whiskey. The logic is out the window. You've got to try it and find out. There's no other way to do it.
There's so much science to it, but there's also so much black magic, kind of art, kind of craziness to it. Just stuff that you can expect what may happen. We experience it with casks on almost a daily basis, where you're putting it in and you're in your head, you think this is what's going to come out at the end of this, and you're surprised. It's just absolutely, it can be dead on what you were expecting, but there's times where it can be so far removed from what you were expecting that you just wonder, how the hell did that happen? There's no rhyme or reason to it. So that's what makes whiskey fantastic, and that's what makes it exciting. You can get so many things that will surprise you. And David's comment there about Mountain Oak, that's a great story. It's one of my all-time favorite Glen Morays we've ever done. Was Mountain Oak was it was a kind of experiment started by Ed. He got air-seasoned casks created from the Ozarks in the US. So it takes 2 years to season the wood. And we took them over, and he wanted to create a bottling or two bottlings that were showpiecing the influence on charring within wood. So he wanted a lightly toasted cask and a heavily charred cask. What he discovered was, after the maturation period, that individually they weren't very exciting or interesting whiskies. But when he combined them together, when he took the heavy char and the lightly toasted cask and mixed them together, he ended up with a whiskey which was absolutely fantastic, and that is Mountain Oak. So there's a great example. Your timing was perfect there. Sorry, I missed whose comment that was. It was that he thought he was doing one thing and it suddenly became another. Yeah, David, thank you. So it ended up being this combination of the two, because the two flavors, when they combined, that's what created the great whiskey, not the individual approach on them. So that was Mountain Oak. It was planned as one thing and became something completely different. And yeah, I agree completely. One of my favorite Glen Morays. Stunning.
Yeah,
whiskey.
I was lucky enough to have a conversation with a gentleman called Ivan Keller recently for a article that's going to be in Untitled next month, and he's the head distiller at West Cork Distillery, and we asked him all about the scientific analysis they do, and he says, well, we do it and we take notice of it, but at the end of the day, gas chromatography machines analyze whiskey. They don't buy it. So he gets all that, but it's still a case of, taste it, experience it, and analysis is great, but it doesn't beat the human experience of actually drinking the stuff and sharing it.
No, we've currently got a whiskey which I'm fully aware. I chose the cask when we released it. That I knew when I selected that it would polarize people, and that was the whiskey that excited me the most. Because it got reactions. You fell into one camp or another. Some people loved it, some hated it. You see that with a lot of whiskeys. So if you were to just go for middle of the road all the time, it wouldn't be exciting. We look for these kind of funky, weird things happening within whiskey, and we try and put them out there and say, like, okay, well, we know this is a little bit different, a little bit crazy, but see what you think. And you'll win some people. You may lose some people, but it's fun in the process.
Oh, Lewis and Sue there, the bottle of 1-1.
Yeah. 1.100, distilled in June 1966, my birth month, and I drank it 16 years ago on my 40th. Wish I still had it now.
Well, you've experienced it, and that counts for more.
Absolutely. Well, that's the magic of the single cask as well. When it's gone, it's gone. This is a beautiful dram. Not that there's much left in the glass, but it's a beautiful dram. I do have the other half of it somewhere here, and that is the thing. When it's gone, it's gone. But the moment that you enjoy it and savor it, that is something. And especially if, as Leslie says, you're enjoying it with friends and it's shared. She's saying that Glenn used a 4-flight whiskey tasting of Glen Moray to introduce a friend to single malts, which is a great way of an introduction and great whiskey to choose for that.
Cheers, Leslie. They enjoyed.
Yeah, the problem is once you kind of know about it, is getting maybe 4, 5, 6 grams that can kind of showcase the expanse of whiskey, because you just can't. You can't do it all in one go. It's the journey, not the
journey,
not the destination, as it were.
I don't know when this journey ends up, though. That's the worrying part.
Well, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
After you, nothing.
I was going to say, I think. Well, the journey. I know where the journey is headed, and it's headed towards peated territory. I would say, if everyone's ready to move on to the next one.
Absolutely.
So next dram is 16.66. It's Grubbily Magnetic, which is from the Highlands. It's a recharred hogshead, and it's 10 years old, distilled on the 25th of November 2010. It's 60.9% ABV, and it's from our peated profile. So one of the things that I'd say immediately is, if you look at the colour on this, it's just beautiful, which I think probably has a wee bit to do with the recharred hogshead. Certainly on the nose, it's all manner of things. For me, I get a bit of kind of rubber and neoprene and machine oil, but equally there's some corn snacks in there and possibly a bit of dairy even. I think this one, it probably will take a bit of time to uncover the layers, and you want to try it neat, but also to try it with water, because I found when I tried this the first time that water really brought out some kind of sweeter peat, some hickory smoke, hot dogs, and actually a bit of camembert, but cheesy in a good way. So I think that the thing to say about the peated flavor profile is that the notes that you can get from this profile, you can get things like kind of smouldering, burning things, bonfire embers, but you can also get things like roasted rosemary lamb and herbal or lavender smoke, frazzles, which is a tasting note that I constantly get, though usually not with this distillery. Even things like herbal or lavender smoke. So take your time when you're experiencing peated drams like these, and if you get something that's a bit wacky, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, because you can get some fairly wacky but wonderful things. So I'd say this dram definitely plays around between sweet and smoky, but I'd say it's grubby but fun. Anne is saying it's medicinal, and she gets fisherman's nets and oilskin. Robert gets some smoky bacon, and David gets spaghetti carbonara. So yeah, curious to see what you think, Lee and Ian.
Well, I tasted this earlier, and what I've written down here is someone added mint to the kiln and then sprinkled cream in the washback. There was a little bit of a mintiness about the smoke, and the as you were saying, the dairy creaminess. It made me think a little bit about blue cheese at one point. It is a bit of a thump. I understand why they called it grubby. It presents first almost as a little bit of a kind of down the middle dram, but once you kind of get into it, all of those notes that you were saying are there, and they're all shown, in that place. It's unexpectedly brilliant from the name anyway, in my opinion.
One of the things I attempted to do at one stage in my career was learn all the different phenol names from the different regions of Scotland where you take your peats from. I failed drastically because they all have really big, long names, and I have a very short memory. So I kind of, but what was interesting was how these phenols broke down into different tasting categories, and that kind of smoky bacon note is a really interesting one, and there is a specific phenol that represents that. And again, as I say, apologies, I'll try not to make it all about Glen Moray, but when we use peat, we use in a kind of Aberdeenshire peat, and that bacon note that I'm getting in this whiskey is really quite strong, and it's a lovely kind of slightly savoury smoke that you get from it, but also that sweetness as well, a slightly jammy kind of character to it as well that I would normally expect from a sherry cask, but a little bit coming through there as well.
I certainly understand what you're saying about the meatiness, that kind of savoury, chewy note that's going on there. And as it happens, this distillery also is one of those distilleries that occasionally uses peat, but it's usually just before closing down season. So they do, however many runs they can do, and basically, pop down into cask what they can pop down into cask. So, it's unlikely that there's a lot of this about, and we're very lucky to get our hands on some. And yes.
I think it's nice to have that grubbiness without the kind of sulfur whack as well, because it is just really, I want to say, cleanly grubby, if that makes sense at all. It's just, you can taste the dirt, but you can taste the different types of dirt.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I understand that. It's kind of that baseline, and you can move off from some kind of layers of whiskey or sort of that way, and some are like right down the middle, and you can move off to different places. But it's a very interesting drama, and I'm enjoying it very much. Somebody was commenting there, accidental collectors. Yes, I think I'm one of those as well. So, there is no way I'm going to be able to drink all of this. It's just ridiculous.
So you've got to share it out.
I was going to say, we can come and help if you want.
Yeah, we'll come help.
You two and Mr. Park, who's running everything behind this, and indeed Mr. Stephen McConnachie, you can't be here, are welcome anytime. Not a problem at all. Just find me if you can.
Got a great tasting note from JW, like walking through Yorkshire Valley in the morning after Guy Fawkes night.
Yes. That sort of
bonfire, yeah.
and leftover fireworks.
I enjoy the fact as well that it's you don't always get kind of oily and coastal notes and at the same time kind of barbecue hickory smoke. So it's really nice to hear both sides of those coming in and that everyone's getting slightly different things. I think with water as well, it'll have an even more different experience of it. The which side, I'm not sure it's going to land on in terms of.
Let's give it a go.
Andy's saying this is very Moorish. I agree, Andy. It's delicious, John.
Well, for me, with the water there, it's stripped a little bit of the peat out the nose, but there is a bit more citrus on the palate. And it's a little bit more kind of thin but alive, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. I think it's I get some kind of, Anne mentioned earlier green olives. I get kind of pimento olives, those stuffed olives, and kind of a bit of like rib, like spare ribs.
Yes, sticky spare ribs.
Mm.
I'm hungry now. What did we have to pay for this, man? I'll just check. Because
we had a Rauch beer, which was the one item that I was not able to find in my local shops.
Sadly, I have a multitude of beer around me, but none of them are Rauch beers. So I'm of no use whatsoever. If anybody has tried the Rauch beer, if you can let us know in the comments, that would be awesome.
I'm going to claim ignorance here as a beer drinker. I had never heard of a Rauch beer.
I've heard of one. I can't remember trying any.
No.
I've got a little bit silly into Belgian beers lately, and it's a whole other world of strangeness that I would encourage everybody to try once.
It's a crazy world. But yeah, that's one that had passed me by when I saw that on the sheet. I was like, interesting. Well, my interest is piqued. I will find one.
I didn't go for that. I did go for the milk stout. So I do have that to try with it, which I will do now.
Just off the top of my head, I think a Belgian Crack beer with, the sour beer with fruits in them, just some dog fruit, cherries, and sourness to go against that smoke would be very nice. Somebody said licorice there. I totally agree with you there. So.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody really dislikes
Rauch beer.
I'm immediately going to go out and find some.
I'm not sure I've had one either, to be fair. Schenkerle is the best Rauch.
I'm going to write that down.
Okay, we're all gonna try it, Dan, and we'll let you know how we get on.
Schenkerle.
You're organized. You have a pen. You copy that and message it to me later, please.
I will. We will do.
I've just got to be able to read my own writing now.
Yeah. And I'll also be expecting you to recommend a beer snack to go with that as well.
We know what happened last time.
Yes.
I accidentally got Mr. Allan here hooked on a certain beer snack, and he's not been the same since.
And that beer snack was?
Schneider's jalapeno pretzels.
Oh, yum.
They are very addictive and very maltish.
I'm surprised we got 58 minutes into the session without having mentioned it.
Yeah.
That time with all the Negronis. Oh,
yes.
I think I'm still hungover.
Someone asked what I was drinking. I'm drinking Orinoco Mocha Milk Stout, which is delicious. Not sure this particular Mocha Milk Stout is quite right for this pairing, but it has paired with other drams well in the past, so definitely give it a go if you are interested.
Excellent. And not that anyone can see this, but I'm going to put it out there. Andrew Park has just said that he'll get around in when we're in Glasgow in a couple of weeks. So everybody now knows that. If he doesn't, I'm going to tell everyone. I'm going to hold him. We're going to hold them to court on.
Andrew, do you want to publish the pub that we'll be meeting in a time?
Whiskeyographer is getting it says add water and there's salami and cigars, which is another interesting pairing. And Andrew's throwing down the gauntlet to say, find me if you can.
That's an excuse for a pub crawl in Glasgow. So that works both.
Everyone wins. Yes, happy day.
Well, before we move on to the final jam of the night, I want to read out Bob's tasting note here because it's great. Eating a barbecue lamb chop while doing a licorice stick dip dab on the side. Very addictive.
I think that's... I love it when people say things and I agree with it. Every now and again, it just resonates with you. It's like, I should have said that when I tried it. Yeah, I'm noticing that licorice a lot more now as well. Great stuff.
No, it lingers, but it's pleasant. It's not overly bitter. It's that kind of sweeter licorice.
Yeah, absolutely, lovely stuff. So I think now's probably a good time to move on to the last dram of the evening.
Sounds good to me.
Which is cask number 3.330. It's called Sherlock Holmes in the Lost World. It's lightly peated. It's from Islay, and it's been in a refill ex-Guyanese rum barrel. It's 17 years old. I was a little bit disappointed when I read the date that it was distilled because it was just 2 days off Valentine's Day, with the theme being love and what have you. But it's the 16th of February. It's one of 184 bottles. And again, sorry, Joel, it sold out last month, but at least we're popping it into a tasting pack for you to try now. And if you've seen me do this before, you'll know that I don't try the last dram just to keep myself, in suspense a little bit, and it adds a little bit of, scariness to the end of the tasting. So I'm going to give it a smell now. Now, the first thing I'm noticing that is there is a sort of very, very low-level peatiness to it, but the rum is very much in play here. Now, the Guyanese rum cask that it's come from is from the Diamond Distillery, and they're still using a sugar. I'll start again. A molasses from a brown sugar, and underneath all of that, there is quite a bit of rum influence there with regards to things like the toffee and that chewy caramel thing going on there. I'm starting to get very excited about trying it, so I'm going to shut up and get some in my mouth. Well, that balances wonderfully with the smoke, the spiciness that runs through, and then right at the end, the sort of the slightly harsher edge of the smoke comes back to visit, and it just sits there like a mist in your mouth. It's just stuck, and I can't see this going anywhere for a while. But that creme brulee and mintiness again, and sorry.
I'm stuck on the tasting note that popped up that was like dolphins and creosote. Lovely.
Dolphins and creosote.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's legal, but yeah, I know where you're going with that.
And yeah, but that coastal inflection, that's often talked about with the Islay distilleries, it's not quite iodine on this, but we are getting the kind of the mentholy sort of saltiness coming through there. It's wonderful. Highland Toffee is a great shout, Joe. Oh, yeah. Oh, but certainly on the nose, that rum cask from Guyana.
Rum casks are notoriously kind of difficult casks to work with, but when they work, they are fantastic. They're a real hit or miss. We've played around with a lot of rum. This one's a real hit. I think that kind of balancing off against the smoke, it just gives you something to kind of distract you from the peat and the sweetness, and as you say, that Highland Toffee note coming through.
Marco is asking, do we know where the rum distillery was that was in the barrel. It's a Ghanaian distillery called the Diamond Distillery. I have no idea how we ended up with the cask, but we can find out and ask our spirits team how it ended up here. But I'm noticing, certainly over the past sort of 5 years, I remember when wine finishes first came around, and I was a bit, I think I see what you're doing, but I wasn't sort of fully sold on it. It sounds to me like the sort of industry in general has got a better grip on finishing now, and certainly with ourselves, we don't do anything less than 18 months in a extra maceration. And if you're gonna do it right, and give it something. And I think this has worked wonderfully. And Joel, trust me, I'm as disappointed as you that I can't buy any of this. Never mind.
Yeah, on your finishing note, that 18 months, it needs 2 summers. 18 months is, just perfect for it. Adding an extra 6 months doesn't make a difference. Winter, really, everything kind of stays a bit in stasis. So if you give it that 2 kind of hits of heat from the summertime, pulling it into the wood, that's really when a finish starts to come into its own. And sometimes you need it with rum, especially with brown spirits, because brown spirit into brown spirit, it sometimes can get lost. But if you give it that time, whenever we've used rum, there's a couple of times we've used rum where we've actually re-racked in rum. So we've left it for 1 year in one rum cask, and we've just re-racked it in a duplicate cask, basically, just so it's getting that double hit of rum, just to emphasize it and bring more flavor out within it. And here, given that the spirit itself has such a dense flavor, you kind of need that, intensity. And as you say, that 18 months is allowing it to come to life.
And the pairing for this one was quite a sweet one. So it was fudge or honeycomb, in ice cream or on its own. So I'm going to give that a bash just now and see.
The only thing that disappoints me about this particular drama is the fact that I couldn't work in a Sherlock Holmes quote. I wanted to say like elementary or something, though. But I've not been able to think of any, and that's kind of, I'll lose sleep over that.
Well, Michael had a good line. He said he didn't love this dram, but he would leave Sherlock and Baker Street. Just quite
very
touche.
Indeed. Well, that's great. Isn't it wonderful when we can talk about things like this, so we're not kind of focused on trying to push different flavors on people and forcing people to like stuff? It's great that we can have that kind of feedback and enjoy it. Excellent stuff. My favorite little factoid about distillery number 3 is that residual heat from the distilling process heats the swimming pool over the road. There you go.
Indeed it does.
It's very topical given current news about energy efficiency.
Indeed. Indeed. My second favorite factoid about this particular distillery is my friend and our friend John Beach up at the Fiddler's Bar accidentally set off the alarm at 3 o'clock in the morning once, and people weren't happy.
Oops.
I can see why.
Just wonderful stuff. This whiskey is like someone cutting a papaya in Demerara sugar and throwing it onto the barbecue. A 10 out of 10. John Paul.
Excellent.
Excellent stuff. Yeah, I can see exactly where you're going there. It's a fantastic, a sort of experiment, if you like. I don't think I've had number 3 out of rum before. We've had a few rum finishes, but certainly not in the context of distillery number 3. I think that one's worked, in my opinion. So well done, team. You can tick that box. You have my permission to do that again.
No, it's a great dram, and I'd be curious actually to hear what everyone else's favorite dram has been. So we'll start with you guys, and everyone else. If you have a favorite dram, pop it in the comments. I'm curious to see what the kind of key winner is here. Though they're all winners because they're all great whiskies. Let's be honest.
I This is tough.
Remember who else is in the room here.
I was just about to say, I was actually going to say the third one, number 35, was going to be my favourite, but because you said that,
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to go with the Sherlock in the Lost World, the last drama of the evening.
Yeah, I think I have to say 35 because I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect that, and the incense and perfume off of it was it was mine happy place, as someone said earlier in the comments.
Well, I am biased, but I maybe shouldn't be, but I'm going to be 35 for me all the way. But I am biased for Glen Moray, obviously, but with SMWS, 35s are always excellent. And we I love working with you guys. I've done a lot of tastings with SMWS over the years, and in fact I'll take this opportunity to promote a tasting that I'm doing on the 7th in the vaults. But it's because so many people have discovered Glen Moray through SMWS, through 35s. The amount of people that come to me at whiskey festivals or at the distillery and say, have you got something like 35 whatever, and they'll give me a name, and I'm like, I don't know, give me more detail. But yeah, so long story short, 35 for me tonight.
In fairness, Ian, had you not said that, I probably would have said the 35.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, I totally agree with you with regards to the stuff that we've got from you has always been top notch. I've never heard anyone put a 35 down for any reason, and in many ways quite similar to Distillery 7 that we were discussing earlier, the Longmorn there. Really, really great bottlings from the SMWS on those. And it's great that we can sort of showcase what you guys do, and in a slightly different way. We take it under our own wing, and the conversation about progressing and getting better and improving, and what can we do different, and how does it work. It's great that we can work off each other and celebrate distillery number 35, which in my opinion is sometimes overlooked as well. And it shouldn't be. Frankly, I think it's a great whiskey all the way through the brand, up to the stuff that we do. Excellent.
I'll drink to that. Cheers.
Cheers to you.
We've had quite a lot of different favourites through. The 16 was quite popular, 35 and the 7 as well. So it's there are a lot of different favourites here, and that's no bad thing. And Ian, I just want to make a point as well that we will have tickets out soon. They'll be out in March for a tasting with Glen Moray at the Spirit Speyside. So everyone who's thinking of attending should keep an eye out for those.
Yeah, if you're up in Speyside at any time, anybody is more than welcome to drop in by and come and see us, come and have a chat, and tell us what your favourite 35 is.
Yeah, I have done that before, and it's well worth it, folks. Excellent spirit, Glen Moray.
But you're banned now, so that's...
It's all right. I'll just go down to 7. It's much better anyway.
Yeah, that's for that.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for tonight. It's been a pleasure, and hope to see you both in person soon again. I'll finish up now with some end of night announcements, but I'll raise a glass to you first.
Cheers, Madeline. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. So our February outturn lands tomorrow at 9 a.m. and we'll shortly be publishing the details of some tastings happening later this month. So keep an eye on smws.com/events, as there's lots of exciting things coming up. As Lee mentioned earlier, tonight we'll be at the Glasgow Whisky Festival in 2 weeks' time, and we'll be at the Newcastle Whisky Festival in 4 weeks' time. If you've read our outturn booklet this month, you may have seen our spirits manager Ewan's intro. I think it's worth quoting it, as it's a great way to end the night. When it comes to whiskey, as in life, there's a perfect match out there for everyone. So tonight, we hope you found yours. Slàinte.